Pen Pals is a spooky story about a lonely young girl who goes looking for a friend online. There was an 11-year-old girl named Melanie who lived with her parents in a remote country area. Every morning, the journey to her school took almost 1 hour. She had a lot of friends in school, but because she lived so far away from them, she spent most of her evenings alone. Melanie began to grow very lonely. For her birthday, the young girl's parents decided to buy her a smartphone. They told her she could use it to keep in touch with her friends after school. However, Melanie found that her friends were often too busy to chat to her on the phone in the evening. Her feelings of isolation only grew worse. Then Melanie's mother had an idea. She suggested that it might be good for her daughter to have a pen pal. Melanie searched the internet and found a website where people could advertise for pen pals. She left a message, asking if anyone would be interested in conversing with her. A few hours later, Melanie's mobile phone buzzed, and she found that she had received an email from someone named Fred. The subject line read, "Friend wanted," and it contained a short message. "Hi, I read your post online. I'm lonely too. Would you like to be pen pals?" Melanie was delighted and immediately accepted the offer. From that moment on, she had a new pen pal. They exchanged emails on a daily basis, and soon they were the best of friends, despite the fact that they had never actually met in person. As they chatted, Melanie began to realize that she had feelings for the boy. She wondered if he would be her first boyfriend. He was so easy to talk to, often had witty things to say, and always made her feel good. However, the girl began to feel that the conversation was very one-sided. The boy was always asking questions and seemed reluctant to write about himself. He knew all about her, but she didn't even know which school he attended or where he lived. One day, the boy sent Melanie an email asking if he could call her. "That way we can talk directly," he wrote. "And besides, I'd love to hear the sound of your voice." Melanie wrote back to him saying, "Yes, I'd really like that. Here's my number. Call around 8 p.m. tonight." The young girl was very happy and couldn't wait to talk to him. Melanie had a recording feature on her phone, so she decided that when he called, she would record their conversation. She wanted to be able to listen to the sound of his voice whenever she felt lonely. A little after 8 p.m., her phone rang and her heart began racing as she picked it up and pressed the record button. They spoke for hours, and it was almost 11 p.m. by the time they said goodnight to each other. When she hung up, Melanie lay back on her bed and tried to imagine what the boy looked like. He sounded like he was very handsome. She tried to remember what they had talked about, but it was all a blur. For some reason, she couldn't recall anything about the conversation. The only thing she could remember was that it had been a lot of fun. After a while, she began feeling very sleepy and decided to go to bed. Suddenly, she heard a voice screaming, "Melanie, what are you doing?" Melanie woke from a deep sleep and looked around groggily. The hands of the clock were pointing to 2 a.m. She saw her mother standing at her bedroom door. There was a look of horror and astonishment on her mother's face. The girl looked around and realized that she was halfway out her bedroom window and, on the verge of falling out. Her mother rushed over, grabbed her by the arm, and dragged her forcefully back into the bedroom. "What were you thinking, Melanie?" she cried, tears forming in her eyes. "You could have been killed." She couldn't explain what she had been doing, and it took her a while to come to her senses. Gradually, she realized that if her mother had not heard strange noises and come into her bedroom, she would have jumped out the window while sleepwalking. Melanie's mother kept asking her, over and over, what she had been doing, but the young girl had no idea. Then, her mother grabbed her phone and saw that there was a recording on it. She pressed the play button. The mother and daughter sat together on the bed, listening as the male voice on the recording repeated over and over, "Jump out the window and kill yourself at 2 a.m. tonight. Jump out the window and kill yourself at 2 a.m. tonight. Jump out the window and kill yourself at 2 a.m. tonight. Jump out the window." "I don't know," I replied, a little irritated. "I haven't thought about it much." "Well, I have," said Sabine. "If we have boys, I will call them Simon, Sylvester, Seymour, Stephen, and Cedric. If they are girls, then Solange, Sylvia, Sandrine, Suzanne, Selena, and Cynthia." I didn't reply and just returned to my paper. One hot afternoon in the middle of summer, Sabine and I were lying on deck chairs, sunning ourselves on the terrace. I glanced over at my beautiful wife and noticed something odd about the skin on her legs. It was peeling off. "Sabine," I said, "you're getting burned." I reached out and put my hand on her thigh. Her skin felt rough and scaly. She groaned lazily. "Don't worry, darling, it's nothing." "It's not nothing, Sabine," I said. I want you to see the doctor about this skin condition of yours. I'm worried. It could be serious. The next morning, despite my wife's protests, I accompanied her to the dermatologist. He examined her for a while, relaxed to loud, angry, and vicious. I had to be careful because even the slightest thing could set her off. We had only been dating for 1 month when I asked her to marry me. My friends said I was rushing into things, but I was worried that some other guy would come along and sweep her off her feet. In the days and weeks after the wedding, we were inseparable. Often, we would spend the morning cuddling in bed. Sabine would coil herself around me and lay gentle kisses on my neck. However, it wasn't long before her attitude towards me began to change. She grew sullen and withdrawn and started pressuring me to have children. I told her it was too soon and said that we should wait until our financial situation was better, but Sabine was incorrigible. All she talked about was having babies. It was as if she was obsessed. "What should we name our children?" she asked one day as I was trying to read the newspaper. "I don't know," I replied, a little irritated. "I haven't thought about it much." "Well, I have," said Sabine. "If we have boys, I will call them Simon, Sylvester, Seymour, Stephen, and Cedric. If they are girls, then Solange, Sylvia, Sandrine, Suzanne, Selena, and Cynthia." I didn't reply and just returned to my paper. One hot afternoon in the middle of summer, Sabine and I were lying on deck chairs, sunning ourselves on the terrace. I glanced over at my beautiful wife and noticed something odd about the skin on her legs. It was peeling off. "Sabine," I said, "you're getting burned." I reached out and put my hand on her thigh. Her skin felt rough and scaly. She groaned lazily. "Don't worry, darling, it's nothing." "It's not nothing, Sabine," I said. "I want you to see the doctor about this skin condition of yours. I'm worried. It could be serious." The next morning, despite my wife's protests, I accompanied her to the dermatologist. He examined her for a while, but couldn't figure out what was wrong. However, he assured us that it was not serious and would probably clear up on its own. He gave Sabine a balm to apply to her skin twice a day and advised her to stay out of the sun for the time being. On the way home, we passed a pet store. Sabine stopped and stared through the shop window. Her face broke out into a smile. "Oh, look, Sebastian," she exclaimed. "They're so cute." I raised my eyebrows when I saw what she was pointing at. It was a cage full of white mice. They were crawling all over each other, and the sight of their flesh-colored tails swinging back and forth sent a chill down my spine. I thought it was a completely hideous sight, but before I could object, my wife was already entering the store. "But, Sabine, we can't." "Oh, stop being such a killjoy," she cried. "They'll be so much fun for our children to play with." "But, Sabine, we don't have any kids." She burst into tears. "Come on, Sabine, calm down," I pleaded. "Everyone is watching us." I tried to hug her, but she wriggled out of my grasp and pushed me away. "No, don't touch me," she cried. "I know you don't love me. That's why you refused to have children with me." I tried to reassure her, telling her I loved her more than ever, but it was no use. She remained angry and brooded wordlessly until I finally relented and took out my wallet. The pet shop owner handed me a cage and a box with holes in the side. By the time we left, Sabine was smiling again, as if we had never argued. An hour later, we arrived home with the white mice. I placed the cage on a dressing table in our bedroom and put the scurrying creatures inside. They ran to and fro, exploring their new home. I counted 1, 2, 3, a total of 18 white mice. It was too much. I sighed and went to the bathroom. Relaxing in a cold bath, I tried to relieve my mind of the stresses of the day. After about half an hour, I got out, dried myself, and returned to the bedroom to dress. When I passed by the cage, I saw the mice still scurrying around and sniffing with their noses in the air. I counted them again. 1, 2, 3. There were only 17 white mice. One must have escaped. I searched the room, looking high and low, but I couldn't find any sign of it. "Sabine," I called. "I think one of the mice got out of the cage." There was no reply. When I went looking for my wife, I found her lying on the terrace, basking in the sun. "Sabine, what are you doing?" I cried. "The doctor told you not to go out in the sun. What about your skin?" She lowered her sunglasses and stared up at me with a venomous look. "Can't you let me be?" she hissed. Then she turned over, yawned, and stretched out like a lizard on a rock. I shrugged my shoulders. I was too tired to argue with her, so I lay down on a deck chair. Before long, I was dozing off. When I awoke, the sun was setting and Sabine's deck chair was empty. I was alone on the terrace. Rubbing my eyes, I got up and walked to the bedroom. Pausing at the door, I peeked inside and saw Sabine sitting cross-legged on our bed. The cage was at her feet and the top lay open. As I watched, she licked her lips and reached inside. Picking up one of the white mice, my wife held the tiny creature up above her, dangling it by the tail. Then, to my horror, she threw back her head, opened her jaw wide and dropped the mouse into her mouth. Her lips closed around it, engulfing it, and she began to chew. I could hear its tiny bones crunching between her teeth. Then, with one big gulp, she swallowed the mouse whole. I held my hand to my mouth, stifling a scream and trying not to vomit. Despite my efforts, I let a little squeak slip out and she turned to look at me. Her eyes grew wide with surprise. Sebastian," she hissed. Sorry, sweetheart, you weren't supposed to see that." Before I could say another word, she pounced on me like a coiled spring and wrapped her arms and legs around my body. She began squeezing me, crushing my torso between her supple limbs. I struggled desperately, unable to breathe. All of the air was being squeezed out of my lungs. I started to lose consciousness. Before I blacked out, I managed to free one of my hands and reached out to grab the first thing I lay hands on. It was a lamp. I began beating Sabine over the head with it, and then everything went black. When I woke up, I found myself lying on the floor. Sabine's dead body lay beside me, her head soaked in blood. I burst into tears and cradled her in my arms for a few minutes. Then, I composed myself and called the police. When they arrived and took a look at the scene, they arrested me. Initially, they planned to charge me with murder, but when they did an autopsy, they discovered the contents of my wife's stomach. 5 partially digested white mice. They realized I was telling the truth. In the end, the police believed that Sabine had gone insane and, thinking she was a snake, tried to crush me and eat me alive. They closed the case and released me without charge. I was allowed to go home. When I reached the house, I felt sad, lonely, and depressed. The place was so empty without Sabine. Despite what had happened, I still loved her and I blamed myself for her death. If only I had known she was losing her mind, perhaps I could have saved her. Going upstairs to the bedroom, I took off my shirt and pants. I wanted to take a bath and just forget about everything. It was then that I noticed the cage. It was empty. All of the white mice were gone. I looked around the room, but there was no trace of them. Just then, I noticed that the bedsheets were moving and undulating. With shaking hands, I reached out and pulled back the bedspread. Underneath, there were several little babies, slithering back and forth over the sheets. They all turned their heads and looked up at me with blazing red eyes. Their mouths opened and their forked tongues poked out as they said in unison, "Salad, Daddy." The Parents is a scary story about a teenage girl who encounters a lot of hardship in her life. There was a teenage girl who wanted to go to a disco for the first time. She asked her parents for permission, but they said she was too young. When she argued with them, they refused to listen and sent her to her room. The girl was angry and decided to sneak out of the house. She really wanted to go to the nightclub. She took some pillows and put them under the blankets on her bed, so it looked like someone was sleeping there. Then she got dressed up, put on some makeup, and slowly opened her bedroom door. She could hear her parents talking in the kitchen, so she quietly tiptoed down the stairs and made her way out the front door. When she got home later that night, she climbed in her bedroom window and found that her bed had been disturbed. The blankets were crumpled, and there was a hole in the sheets. There was also a hole in one of the pillows. In the morning, when she came down for breakfast, she didn't say anything to her parents, but they were looking at her strangely. In the evening, her parents went out for dinner. The girl wanted to call one of her friends, but she had run out of credit. She went out to the local shop and topped up her mobile phone. It was getting dark, and on her way back, she had to walk through a park. She was going down a deserted path when all of a sudden, a masked man jumped out of the bushes and tried to attack her. He had a long iron bar in his hand, and he swung it at her head. She managed to dodge the blow just in time, and the iron bar whizzed past her ear. The girl immediately fled before the masked man could catch her. She ran as fast as she could, not daring to look back, until she arrived at her front door. The girl's parents came home a few minutes later, and the terrified girl told them what had happened. They scolded her for walking through the park on her own in the dark and told her to be more careful in future. They were still giving her strange looks. The parents told their daughter to take a warm bath to relax and calm her nerves. The girl undressed and got into the bath. She shut her eyes and tried to forget about the disturbing events of the day. Suddenly, the door opened and Mother came rushing in with a toaster. Before the girl had a chance to react, her mother tried to throw the toaster into the bathtub. However, the woman misjudged the length of the wire, and the toaster couldn't reach that far. The wire stopped it short, and it dropped harmlessly on the bathroom floor. The girl had narrowly escaped being killed by an electric shock. Jumping out of the bath, the girl started screaming at her parents. In that moment, she realized that they had been trying to kill her. Grabbing her mobile phone, she told them she would call the police unless they told her why they wanted her dead. Her mother burst into tears, and her father hung his head in shame. The parents sat down on the edge of the bath and tried to explain. It turned out that the girl's uncle, her father's brother, was terminally ill in hospital. He was a successful businessman and had amassed a huge fortune during his long career. He had no children, so when he drew up his will, he decided to leave all his wealth to his favorite niece. When the uncle died, the teenage girl would receive over $1 million. If she died, then the money would automatically go to her parents. The girl couldn't believe what her parents were telling her. She realized that the pair were incredibly greedy and soulless. Infanticide was the worst crime that a parent could commit. She struggled to understand how her parents could be so low as to try to murder their own daughter for money. It was a betrayal that could never be forgiven. The girl immediately packed her belongings and left the house that very night. She booked into a cheap hotel and decided to cut off all communication with her parents. Despite the many difficulties she faced, she tried to make a life for herself alone. She got a job and earned enough money to put herself through university. Although she was very busy, she set aside some time each week to visit her uncle in hospital. In her first year of university, she met a guy in her class who seemed very nice. He wasn't very good-looking, but he had an attractive personality. He was kind and gentle and always made sure he was there for her in times of trouble. When she was in his arms, she felt safe and protected. Finally, she had found someone in her life who she could trust. A few months passed, and the happy couple decided to get married. They had a modest wedding in a local church and invited all their friends to celebrate the joyous occasion with them. The girl insisted that they not invite her parents to the wedding. When the guy asked her about it, she told him how they had betrayed her. The day after the wedding, the newlyweds went on their honeymoon. They booked a short holiday at a scenic resort in the mountains, next to a shimmering lake. When they arrived, the location looked so beautiful that they decided to take a boat trip on the lake and take in the view. It was autumn and the leaves were falling from the trees. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow across the skies, and the resort was almost deserted. When they rowed out to the center of the lake, the husband got up and grabbed his wife. He pushed her over the side of the boat, and she tumbled into the icy water with a splash. He grabbed an oar and began beating her over the head with it as she struggled to stay afloat. Eventually, he knocked her unconscious, and she sank beneath the waves. Then he rowed back to shore and called the police, tearfully recounting how his wife had accidentally fallen overboard and drowned. A few days later, the girl's uncle was found dead in his hospital bed. He had been smothered with a pillow. Within a few months, the girl's husband received the $1 million inheritance, and he split it with the girl's parents.